So let's talk about Ireland's Leo Varadkar. He has resigned. He's citing political and personal reasons. Tom, I think the most obvious and proximate cause is the humiliating dual referendum defeat not that long ago. Mm-hmm. Do you think? I think that's probably the...
Definitely. I mean, it was easy at the time to gloss over just what a profound sort of challenge to the whole Irish establishment, really, that vote was, because they all lined up behind both of those referendum questions and urged everyone to vote yes. And the fact that they were so emphatically defeated, I think, was something that was always going to cause questions to be asked about his particular leadership. At the time, he said he was going to carry on. He tried to make a virtue out of the fact that we all backed it. So, so it can't be a repudiation of us specifically, but obviously that was something which dealt a big blow to him. And whilst he claims that it's a kind of mix of personal and political reasons, it's hard to rule that out. I think referenda, as we talked a bit about on the podcast last week, have become a fantastic way of just demonstrating how profoundly out of touch politicians are, because they keep either calling them, thinking that everyone will agree with them on it, or they keep begrudgingly offering one on an issue of public importance, Brexit, etc., and then realising that the public not only just narrowly disagree with them, but really disagree with them on these questions. So you can't separate out those two things, but he's hardly had a wonderful time at the top of Irish politics, and he wasn't an overwhelmingly popular Taoiseach by any stretch of the imagination, but you can't help but feel this was the thing that finally pushed him out, because it just showed how distant he was from the people he was supposed to be governing on behalf of.
Yeah, Patrick.
I can't help but wonder what else is about to come out about Leo Varadkar, but obviously we'll have to wait. The key point for me is touching on what you just said there, really, which is that if you actually really think about a lot of the core things that are affecting people's day-to-day lives at the moment, whether or not that's national sovereignty with Brexit, whether it's the net zero stuff, whether it would be with things like mass immigration or illegal immigration, or things like the trans issue that we've spoken about there, and a variety of those different things. I am pretty convinced that we would know how the vast majority of the public would vote on all of those issues. And you have to look at how radically different a lot of our politicians feel about them and the policies that they want to bat through. And then when they do put them to the public, they tend to get a kicking. My concern is, though, that in the wake of Brexit and in the wake of this Leo Varadkar issue that we've got now, we might never really have a referendum again. And you look at the next kind of referendum that we've got, which is the general election, I would say. What are you voting for there? I mean, it's one area, genuinely, I don't say this very often, it is an area where I do agree with George Galloway on. It's two cheeks of the same backside. What are we voting on? So the only time you can be trusted to make a choice is between essentially two people that you hate and don't offer you anything.
Yeah, and the fact, the way that the Irish political class all lined up to every single party behind those two particular referendums is a good illustration of that kind of problem. I mean, Tom, talking about Varadkar specifically, I mean, he is known for a couple of quite dodgy things. Thinking about Irish hate speech laws, probably even worse than the Scottish ones we were just talking about. I mean, he's seen as a sort of very woke leader. Migration has become a massive issue in Ireland in the way that it wasn't previously, and he recently said that St Patrick was a male, single, undocumented migrant, as if that was some sort of persuasive argument.
No, absolutely. I mean, the politics of immigration in Ireland seems so acute, like much more so than even here. Obviously, there were those riots in Dublin at the tail end of last year, which had been very keenly kind of used to try and discredit the quite widespread discontent with the influx of not only asylum seekers but also economic migrants into the country. But it's quite clear that that's not just a fringe criminal concern. That's something that voters across the political spectrum are really concerned about. And it's another issue, not unlike the family and care referendums recently, where basically the entire Irish political class, including the supposedly insurgent Sinn Féin party, all agree on. Absolutely. If anything, there was some interesting polling suggesting that Sinn Féin voters are more anti-immigration than your average, incidentally, despite the fact the political leadership there are certainly not of that particular ilk. So it's just on issue after issue, you have not just Leo Varadkar, not just Fine Gael, but like the entire Irish political establishment being on the wrong side of the voters. Yeah. And that's going to come to a head at some point. I mean, if it's going to continue to manifest itself in kind of protests and whatnot, but it'll be interesting to see what the political electoral consequences of all this are going to be.
Definitely. And Patrick, just lots of British viewers will probably think of Varadkar as one of the many frustrators of Brexit. He played a sort of outside role in that.
Yeah, well, again, absolutely. And that chap there decided that he wanted to massively cozy up with Brussels. Obviously loved the huge amount of backslapping that he got any time that he was with his European friends. Like, couldn't run his own home, clearly, quite literally, because he's resigned probably before he was pushed. But I mean, there's the issues with the border, for example, cozying up to Joe Biden, who, I mean, I don't know whether it's Joe Biden or his carers, but one of them or all of them hate us, clearly. So you've had that thing threatening to take us to the ECHR over things like historic prosecutions, over the Troubles, etc. I did find that quite astonishing, really. But I think, again, one of the key points is that I think he massively, massively underestimated actually how patriotic the Irish people are. And when they were really backed into a corner over massive immigration levels, higher per capita, I believe, than we've got over here, huge issues as well with things like migrant hotels, for example. And that's mainly, I think, because you can hide a lot of migrant hotels here in like big cities in Britain, because it all blends in, big multicultural cities, etc. Ireland, is actually very, very dispersed. So if you do plant one in the middle of nowhere, it has a disproportionate impact on that local community. They were more inclined to rise up about that. There is more, I think, over pride in the national flag of Ireland than there is even here in Britain. And I think he massively underestimated that. And ultimately, it's all very well and good cozying up to Brussels and trying to engage in gimmicky political style things like we've just discussed. But if you just completely desecrate and ignore your base, the people who actually do vote for you, who quotes unquote pay your wages, then you end up in a situation like this. I don't think history is going to remember him particularly well. The only thing that might benefit him is that history will probably be taught in schools by incredibly woke teachers who will indeed remember him well.
And finally, Tom, I mean, can we put Varadkar in that sort of vein of almost liberal or woke authoritarian leader? I'm thinking like he reminds me of a sort of Trudeau figure or a Jacinda figure or a Sturgeon figure.
It does certainly seem that kind of centrist political figures seem to reach for woke authoritarianism as a way to sort of carve out a legacy. I mean, they would see it, and you saw this in his resignation speech, see it as part of a project of kind of liberalising their respective nations, of kind of bringing them into the 21st century. He name-checked the abortion referendum. And in a weird sort of way, I think they think these outrageous authoritarian impositions, like the hate crime bill that they've been mooting for a long time, are like an extension of that, when they're completely different. One's about freedom, one is about limiting freedom. But nevertheless, I think there is that sense that the more that you have politicians who don't really have much of a kind of vision, the more they kind of reach for these kinds of policies, these kinds of laws, these kinds of measures, because for whatever reason they're seen on the kind of international stage as progressive, interesting, righteous things to do. So in pursuit of a legacy, they end up doing some quite horrendous authoritarian things, it ends up being.